Thank you, everybody, for coming today. What a joy, what a delight to have you here tonight. Brian's opening reminded me, why don't Jews drink? Kills the pain.
We got the mask.
This story was told to me by my friend Rebecca Boroson, and it was told to her by her grandmother. She said, "My grandmother was a young girl, lately married to the most learned and pious man in the village, but she was not happy. My grandmother loved to sing, and he would have no singing. My grandmother loved to dance. He would have no dancing. My grandmother loved to go barefoot and feel the earth, and he made her wear stiff, heavy shoes. She was an orphan, and the match had been made for her by the women of the village. She had had no choice but to accept. No man would have her, with no family, no dowry, except her long, shining hair. And even that was cut, as was the custom at marriage. But it was the wrong match. It was the wrong match. And every day was harder than the day before, so that my grandmother stopped wanting to sing, stopped wanting to dance. And the stiff, heavy shoes began to feel like her skin. One autumn day, as she was gathering kindling for the fire, she walked by the river and saw in it her reflection, drab against the season's reds and golds, and even against the river's greeny brown. And my grandmother thought to herself, if I walk into the river, these stiff, heavy shoes will drag me down. And that will be the end of my misery. And so she put down the bundle of twigs she was carrying, and she turned to the river, and she began to walk in. And when the water reached her breasts, she saw, floating right in front of her, a green hair on the water. It is a Rousalka, she thought. And if she had been a Christian, she would have crossed herself. For Rousalkas are water nymphs that lead men to their death. But since she was going to her death anyway, my grandmother was not afraid. And she spoke to this Rousalka, whose head was obscured by the watery green hair, and she said, "Rousalka, let me pass. I have my journey to make." The hair moved like green water snakes, and the snakes parted to reveal a head. And then the head rose up upon a body. And now my grandmother was truly surprised, for she saw, Rousalkas don't wear clothes. This was a male Rousalka, something she'd never heard of. And the male Rousalka began to sing the sweetest, greenest song she'd ever heard. And he held his hands out to her and said, "Come, I will share your journey." And taking his hands into hers, my grandmother began to walk deeper and deeper into the water. Under the water was the Rousalka's home. And there was always music in it. And my grandmother became famous among all the Rousalkas for her singing and dancing. She was never happier in her whole life. She lived there for 100 years. Now, time among the Rousalkas spreads out, so that one of our seconds, which we hardly notice and almost never enjoy, becomes a full sweet year. So that really my grandmother was under the water among the Rousalkas for no more than 100 human seconds, but it was enough human time for a man from the village to see her sink. He dove in, he dragged her out, and when she awoke, she was in the big bed in her husband's house, and the Rousalka, invisible to everyone but her, stood at the foot of the bed weeping green tears. And she said, "No, I want to go home back to my husband." And she held her hands out to this creature that nobody but her could see. "Your husband is here," said a man she hardly recognized with a stooped back and a black beard as he took her hands in his. "No," she said, "my green husband." And she raved like that, they told her afterwards, for 2 days. But the longer she was in bed, the less she could see the Rousalka. And at the end of the second day, he was no longer visible. As soon as she was well enough to get out of bed, she went looking for him. But her husband sent a little boy to accompany her to keep her from going back into the water. And so she would walk up and down the riverbank, never taking her eyes off the water. And then her belly began to swell with my mother. And even after my mother was born, she would sit by the river nursing and watching. But she never saw one strand of his green hair or heard one strain of his green song. Day after day, she kept vigil, mute in her misery. But after some time, as she watched and listened to the river, her own song broke out. And her foot kept time. And her hair grew back in elf locks. And her husband, who was not a bad man or a stupid one, was so relieved to see his wife restored to health that he encouraged her to sing and dance and go without shoes. And he even asked her to let her hair grow long and beautiful. And every morning he would watch her smooth it with a tortoiseshell comb. And life became better in that house. And as more babies came and the years went by, she had no time to go looking for her Rousalka. And after some time, they left the old country and they moved to the new world, the Neuwelt. And here they came, and now there was no way ever to see him again. Whenever my grandmother told me this story, she would brush my hair and she would say, "Remember always to sing and dance. It is the only way to stay alive. Now run and play, my little green child, run and play." Thank you very much for listening. And to Rebecca Boroson, it's in a book called With Signs and Wonders. And we have another story, a short one. It's so nice to be back together again, huh? What a marvel. A long time ago, Shah Abbas liked to dress in disguise at night and open a secret door at the back of the palace and walk into the streets of the city and listen to the people of his realm. And he would walk and he would listen. He could hear the sizzling of kebabs on the braziers along the street, and he could hear the gossip behind the garden walls and the laughter of lovers and the crying of other lovers. And he would walk and listen and walk. And he could smell the lemon blossoms and hear the clopping of the donkeys. And one night, as Shah Abbas was walking, he came to the poor part of town. And to his surprise, he heard someone singing from a dark little street. Poor, poor. He was surprised. He thought, how could somebody be singing such a nice, joyful song on such a poor street? I'll go look. And he came down the street, and he came to a little house at the end of the street, looked in the window. There was a man sitting there with a bowl of lentils, singing, and Shah Abbas knocked on the window and said, "Is a guest welcome here?" And from inside, he heard the man say, "A guest is a gift from God. Come in." Goes in. The man says, "Welcome, welcome. Here, eat, eat, eat." And the Shah Abbas sat, and he's sitting, and he said, "I heard your song. It's a nice song. I sing. I'm a happy man. What do you do?" He says, "I'm a cobbler. I fix old shoes." He didn't know it was the Shah. Shah was in disguise. And he said, "And from this you make a living?" This is what my cousins in Detroit always ask me. He said, enough for today's meal. And he said, what about tomorrow? And the man answered, God be blessed day by day. Well, Shah Abbas was curious about that way of living, and he came back to the palace. He said, thank you for the meal. Came back to the palace, called the vizier, and he said, tomorrow there's a new law of the land. No more fixing shoes. No more cobblers on the street. That night he dressed in disguise. He opened the secret door. He came through the streets. He listened and he walked and he listened and he walked and he came to the same poor part of town and heard the same song. Came up to the window, knocked on the window. Is a guest welcome here? A guest is a gift from God. Come in, my friend, come in. It's good to see you again. Comes in. Not as many lentils as the night before. How are you? I'm well, but I had a strange day. What do you mean? Well, I went out to fix old sandals and shoes, and there's a new law in the land. No cobbling, no mending shoes. I think the Shah must have gone crazy. So what did you do? He said, I'm smart. I carried wood. That's what I did. I carried wood. I earned enough for today's meal. And Shah Abbas said, what of tomorrow? I said, God be blessed day by day. Thanked him, came back to the palace, called the vizier. He said, tomorrow there's a new law. No more carrying firewood. The next night, same as before, down the streets, and he hears the song again. So curious. All the way down the little alley, comes all to the little house, looks in the window, there's the man again. He's not quite so many lentils as the night before. He says, is a guest welcome here? He said, a guest is a gift from God. Come in, come in. And he went in, and again, he sat there and said, how are you? Very well. How was your day? A strange day. I went to carry firewood. Now there's a new law, you can't carry firewood. What did you do? He said, I carried water for people. I'm a smart cobbler. If I can't do one, I do the next. I earned enough for today's meal, and I'm so pleased you could join me. Eat, eat. And Shah Abbas said, what of tomorrow? God be blessed day by day, he said. Well, he was so puzzled by this man's faith that he came back to the palace and he said to the vizier, tomorrow, anybody caught carrying water becomes a soldier in my army. And that night, he heard the song again. Singing happily, he comes down the street. There's the house. He knocks on the window. Is a guest welcome here? A guest is a gift from God. Come in. He goes in. And there's the cobbler, water carrier, firewood carrier, sitting in the uniform of a soldier with a scabbard and a sword. And Shah Abbas comes. They're eating together. He said, why, you're a soldier now? He said, I'm a soldier. I don't know from swords, but I'm a soldier. I fix shoes. I don't kill people. But anyway, here I'm a soldier. And how did you get enough money to make the meal? Because I know for a fact they pay soldiers every 2 weeks. Yeah, I know too. But I sold my sword. See, it's made of wood. He shows him. I sold the blade to the blacksmith, and with the money I could buy a meal for us tonight. So enjoy, eat. And Shah Abbas said, excuse me, you're a soldier in the Shah's army and you sold the blade of your sword? Yeah. Eat. When he left that night, he came back to the palace and he said to the vizier, tomorrow we will marshal the troops in front of the palace. I will sit in my throne in the field, and we will bring a prisoner up and have his head chopped off by this soldier. And that's what happened the next day. All the soldiers marshaled, and they were all there, including our cobbler and the captain of the army, and they brought a prisoner out and threw him in the ground, and the captain said, I will call on one of you men to step forward with your sword and chop off this prisoner's head. Shah Abbas was sitting at the far end of the field, and he came to the cobbler. Step forward, soldier. Draw your sword. Chop off this man's head. And the little cobbler soldier said, in my faith, I need to be sure that this prisoner is indeed guilty, for it would be a terrible sin if I took the life of an innocent man. So may I make a prayer to my God? And the captain looked at the Shah. The Shah said, yes, yes. And he said, God, if this prisoner is guilty, give me the strength to chop off his guilty head. But if he's innocent, may you turn the blade of my sword to wood. And he drew the sword, and it was made of wood, and everybody gasped. And the captain said to the prisoner, go, you're free. And he ran away. Thank you, and he ran away, and he was done. Now the Shah came off the throne and came up to the soldier, and he stood in front of him and said, soldier, do you know who I am? You are the Shah, the ruler, the leader of us all. Soldier, is a guest welcome here? And now he knew the voice of his guest. And he looked up and said, a guest is a gift from God. And the Shah took him to become his new vizier. And they always talked when they needed wisdom. And whatever problem or dilemma the Shah had, he would turn to his new vizier, who would always tell him, God be blessed day by day. And the story says that if you ever walked by that palace at night, you would have heard two voices singing a happy song.